This university always finds spaces where stories are waiting to be told. My name is Ashraful Haq. I'm a research scholar in the Department of English, Manu. We have reached the second day of our journey together. I have been given the voice of everyone who built this conference to welcome you to this morning's plenary talk. I welcome the dignitaries among us, the professors who guide our thinking, and my fellow scholars who share in the labor and beauty of this work. I want to thank the organizing committee for this opportunity. It was a very kind choice, or maybe it was a very brave one. Either way, I am glad to be here. Now I request our guests and the chair to please be seated on the dais. To be honest, I think I have the best deal today. I get to share the stage with these legends while you all listen from your seats. I can see their notes, I can hear them think. I might even catch some of their brilliance by just being near them. Now I have shared my luck with you. Let's get to the work at hand. We are truly delighted to have Professor Sharan to join us as chair for this session, especially as he has been a consistent and valued presence at our conferences for years. Dr. M.E. Ved Sharan is a retired professor from English and Foreign Languages University, where he dedicated his career to the Department of English, Second Language Studies. With a PhD from the University of Hyderabad, his journey has been defined by a deep commitment to understanding the ways of languages and the cultural contexts in which they exist. His teaching career covers the full range of education, offering him a unique perspective on learner development from school-aged children to the doctoral candidates. He bridges the gap between foundational literacy and academic advanced research. Sir, we are glad that you are here to guide this conversation. Now it's time to introduce our first speaker. We have Professor Amit Kumar. His intellectual formation reflects a long engagement with the structures of language, the conditions of learning, and the practices through which knowledge is made legible. He comes to us from FLU's Department of Comparative Literature and India Studies, but his roots go back to the banks of Ganga in Bhagalpur, Bihar. There is something deeply sincere about a man who started by founding the Genex Institute for English in Sahibganj, Bhagalpur, Bihar, and ended up as a Fulbright Fellow in the quiet greens of Oregon, United States, and Dard Fellow in the historic walls of Dresden, Germany. He has traveled to the world not just to see it, but to understand how languages act as a bridge between a village in Bihar and a university in Europe. He is the mind behind books like Learning to Learn and Classroom Talks in English. These aren't just titles on the shelf. They are his efforts to understand how multilingual teachers find their footing in a world which often demands a single tongue. His work is really a research for a more democratic classroom, a place where students' native voice is a strength rather than a hurdle. Professor Kumar has spent his life deciphering the DNA of our stories and the methods of our speech. Now let's prepare to step outside the lines as he explores the intersections of disability and fiction in his talk, interestingly titled, Breaking the Fame, Embracing the Shame, Disability, Subalternity, and Contemporary Fiction. Sir, over to you. Thank you, sir.
Introduce all the speakers. Now you will call Amit Samir, right? Because he needs PPT. So just we'll start with Rajul.
Okay.
So you just go with all the player from the teachers first.
Oh, so that, okay. So, ma'am, until then we can take the board. We have some break because of some technicalities. Till then, I will introduce the next speaker so that we'll have the introduction. Till then, the technical people will do the things. We have our second speaker, Dr. Raju Nayak V, Assistant Professor at the University, at the English and Foreign Languages University. His journey as a scholar has taken him from the halls of Silver Jubilee College in Kurnool to the University of Hyderabad. He eventually reached the University of California, Berkeley, as a Sri Raman postdoctoral fellow. His work on tribal world and its representation in literature is valuable. He spent many years looking at the novels of Gopinath Mohanty. This research led to his work on how these communities are portrayed in fiction. He looks for the truth of their lives in every stage and writes about how their oral traditions meet the modern world. And we have a final guest, Dr. Shribita PV. It's a homecoming sorts of experience to introduce our final guest to this city. As her academic foundation was built right here in the city, she completed both her MPhil and PhD at the University of Hyderabad. She has brought her insights to the classroom of Shri Ram College of Commerce and Motilal Nehru College at Delhi University, and served for many years at the Central University of Karnataka before taking up the final role as Associate Professor at Kannur University. Her work is deep and scholarly on the Ezhava and Thea identities, not just entries in census. Rather, they are about living histories of gender, caste, and reform in North Malabar. She has looked into the folds to find stories of Nambutri women and has challenged our notions of chastity and revenge through the writings of Lalitambika Antarjanam. From her critical dance studies to the studies of caste and race, Dr. Shribita reminds us that subaltern is not a person who is silenced, rather a person whose history has been stolen or constructed by others. She is here to help us deconstruct those narratives and find the truth in the mobility and labor of those who dared to cross borders. Now it's time to... Okay. Now I'll hand over the mic to Chair, Professor M.E. Vedshatan. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. Good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome. It's okay. Yeah, good morning to you all, and a very, very warm welcome to this amazing session. I'm sure it's going to be. We have a wide range of topics here that are very germane to the theme of our conference. Three very experienced, learned scholars and teachers here who will share their experiences academically and personally, I'm sure. So, the subaltern has been relatively a new entry into the academic field, especially in India, I think. And now it's become very influential in Latin America and other cultures as well. So this is a new perspective that we will get into these studies. I believe it's a very contested term, as most terms in language and literature are, and they are very intensely emotional experiences as well. I think we will discuss these things after we listen to our speakers. I now welcome Professor Amit Kumar, my colleague and friend, to present his ideas here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Vedasharan. I'm humbled to stand in front of Professor Rajendra Chenni, whom I value as an extraordinary scholar. My dear colleagues are Dr. Raju Nayak, Dr. Shibita. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. While I wait for the PowerPoint to start, let me just briefly talk about what am I going to speak on. I'm going to talk about disability and try to understand disability as a subaltern category. Not much has been done with regard to disability as a subaltern category. Subaltern studies, most of the time, has been seen as a place where you see people with ethnic identities, ethnic segregations, marginalization, caste hierarchy, victims of caste hierarchy, race, gender, and tribal communities have been seen most of the time as subalterns. However, what is really very important is to understand that even disability could be seen as a subaltern category. I'm trying to make a case for that. It is there in a certain way. Then I go on to look into two novels from the contemporary fiction. Both of them are written in English, kind of Indian English, whatever. And then try to see how these two novels exemplify concerns about subalternity. And at the same time, I try to come to a conclusion, make a case saying that we need to investigate disability in a much more serious manner and see this particular category as something which has a lot to offer in terms of subaltern studies and the way in which we are going to develop this particular notion. Yeah. The title of my presentation is Breaking the Frame and Embracing Shame. Breaking the frame, let me just explain what do I mean by that. Disabled characters, most of the time in fiction, they break the frame. What do I mean by the frame? The frame is the kind of a confinement provided to these characters by social structures. Social structures provide a kind of a normative understanding, provide us with kind of a set agenda, and disabled characters most of the time do not fit into that social norms. And as a part of resistance, as a kind of a part of protest, they break the frame in that sense. Subaltern characters are, I believe, strongly made to kind of break the frame. And then they just don't break the frame. If at all you break the frame in a society, you have to embrace the shame. Shame is a weapon here. I'm trying to make a case here, trying to say that shame is not something that one would stay away from, but shame is something which is really very important and becomes the raison d'etre of some of the disabled characters. Yeah, shame is something that they embrace and they kind of become a part of that, and then they use shame as a kind of a weapon in such a manner that the society rather feels ashamed, not the characters who are disabled. So break the frame and embracing shame. So shame as a weapon, yeah, shame as a device, shame as a kind of a ornament by which the disabled characters are trying to create an identity for themselves. If not identity, let me just say presence, some kind of a presence to assert themselves. So disability, subalternity, and contemporary fiction. So that is what I have. That is the central argument which I'm trying to advance, and the entire slides are only a kind of a demonstration of this particular notion. Yeah. Can I wait for the slides? Yeah. Yeah. Internet. If you just go to internet and give the, yes, you got that. If it connected to the projector. Yeah. Fine. Somebody may have to help me, to go to the next slide and all that. Yeah, next slide. Yeah. Okay, this is what I mean, and the kind of image that we have. shows the manner in which a disabled character is actually trying to break the frame and then come out of it, and trying to see how there is a possibility. And with that kind of a shame, you see that there's a smile on the face as if something has been won, and a kind of a, there is a triumph, that one has actually gathered. So let me just go to the next one. Yeah. Contents of the presentation. I begin with the theoretical foundations, conceptualizing disability as subalternity. So we're actually trying to look at what are the theoretical ideas that are there which help us understand disability and subalternity. Is it possible for us to link that? So that's the first question that I'm trying to ask. And then we go ahead and look into this novel. The first novel that I'm going to deal with is analyzing Indra Sinha's Animals People. Now this is some novel which not many people have discussed, Animals People by Indra Sinha. This is a novel that talks about a character who is walking on all fours, in the sense like an animal. Yeah. So he is not seen as a human being at all, and he is actually seen as an animal. The perspective that he is the protagonist and the perspective that is adopted is the first person narration. And Animals People provides us an opportunity to look into the manner in which a quote-unquote subaltern character with disability is seen as an animal and not as a human being. It is in that sense a very important way in which the novelist is trying to assert that subaltern disabled characters are more or less treated like animals. But then what is interesting about this character is he uses this animality. So society provides this animality to him, and then he uses this animality to revolt against the society. So in that sense is actually asserting his existence in a very, very strong manner. So the next novel that I'm going to deal with is Trying to Grow by Firdaus Kanga. Trying to Go by Firdaus Kanga. That's another important novel that looks into the question of disability and tries to see how there is this resistance to grow. There's a character here, and then all that the character wants is to grow, and the society does not provide that opportunity to this particular character to grow. So that kind of a strong resistance, to grow is an innocent desire. Even that is kind of taken away, and then the character is actually made to suffer because of the kind of disability that this particular character has. So, and then I go ahead and try to talk about a few conclusions in a way, some kind of observations with regard to these two novels. This could be extended. This could be extended into a full-length book where you have individual novels like that, and we can actually. But for the sake of presentation, I've only taken two novels. There are a list of some 7 to 8 novels. One can actually write chapters on each of them concerning subalternity and disability. Yeah, that is what. Next, please. Next slide. Defining the subaltern. If we look into the manner in which switch on the torch. I need a light here, if somebody can switch on the torch. Switch on the torch. Yeah. Okay, defining the subaltern. I'm using 3 definitions of subaltern here because these are the ones that are actually going to help me. One is by Dipesh Chakrabarty. Dipesh Chakrabarty has, of course, we are aware of provincializing Europe. He is trying to say that the subaltern classes were groups whose political mobilization was not necessarily contained by the institutions of the nation state. Now, what is really very interesting? Yeah. What is really very interesting about this? Switch off the torch. What is interesting about this particular definition is the manner in which Dipesh Chakrabarty is trying to provide space for those who do not have political mobilization. Now, people with disabilities, they don't have political mobilization. In fact, they are the worst category of people when it comes to voting. No political party is interested in disabled voters because that's a kind of a minority. And they are not bothered whether that vote swings this way, that way. So political mobilization is something that is actually completely missing in the context of people with disability, and because of which this category comes under subalternity. That is what I'm actually trying to make the case, and I'm not trying to use all the definitions of subalternity, but only a few ones which help me to make a case for disability and subalternity. The next, yeah, 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 fine. Yeah. Homi Bhabha has another important way in which we can understand subalternity. The subaltern is a name for the marginal, the dispossessed, and the oppressed. The marginal, the dispossessed, and the oppressed. Now, these are the categories that go well with people with disability, in the sense that people with disability are forced to lead a kind of a quote-unquote normal life, and it is, of course, that kind of a normalization is not possible for various reasons, because of which somebody who cannot fall into the category of the normal are easily branded as abnormal. And abnormal people are always asked to live in a periphery. They are never part of the mainstream. So in that sense, you see that there is again a case there. And then Ranjit Guha, of course, he is trying to talk about something called inferior rank. Now, people with disability come to this particular category. They are somebody who could be categorized under this notion of inferior rank. They are people with inferiority. That is a social construction, that they have some inferiority, and because of which they cannot participate in the mainstream discourse, and because of which they should be, in that sense, they qualify to be considered under the category of disability. So all these three interesting definitions, I'm not going to Gramsci, etc., because that is, anyway, that is discussed quite a lot. So these three people help us look into this category of disability and help us look into this, construct a bridge between disability and subalternity. And that's the reason why, in some sense, that is helpful to our understanding. Yeah. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, now I go ahead and try to look into some of the important theorists of disability. For example, we have Anita Ghai. Anita Ghai has a very interesting quotation trying to say that disabled people in India occupy the position of the subaltern, and she's trying to say that this is the position of the subaltern, and she's trying to say that they are not part of the nationalist discourse. They're not part of this kind of a nationalist situation, and it is for this particular reason that they stay away, and they're most of the time ostracized in that sense. Again, we have other kinds of theorists like Nirmala Ereveles, who's trying to say that disability becomes a critical site for the production of subaltern subjectivities. So there's a kind of a critical site which becomes, this is a place where subaltern subjectivities are actually constructed, articulated, and made to be present in society. So this is something, these two important theorists, I'm trying to use their ideas with the kind of definitions that we have about subalternity and the kind of definitions that we have with regard to disability provided to us by theorists of disability scholars. Now it is easy for us to look into this, that disability, when we talk about disability studies, we are talking about an intersectional space. It is an intersectional space where hundreds of things come together, such as gender, of course, race, caste, ethnic identity, yeah, and various kinds of hierarchies, race, of course, yeah, different situations. They kind of merge here and create an intersectional zone, because a person with disability can have disability and also have other identities. That is the crucial problem there, because of which I think disabled characters with subalternity are more pronounced and more, in a way, voiceless than other kinds of individuals. That is my take. I'm open for any dispute and any kind of argument. It is possible that I think this is something which we have to take into consideration seriously. Apart from the social marginalization, there is also this kind of a medical marginalization that people with disability actually face. Yeah. So please, next please. So now, I'm sorry. Yeah, disability shame, I was talking about the idea of shame. Stigma is something which is important. In disability scholars have actually been talking about stigma. And stigma is that kind of a shame as a disciplinary mechanism. It is imposed upon a disabled individual by institutional mechanisms. Yeah, you are not in a position to do this, you're not in a position to do that, and the person with disability is forced to carry that kind of a stigma. Now that stigma implies a kind of a shame, and because of this shame, there cannot be an emancipation. However, we come across characters who are revolting against this kind of a shame and stigma and trying to argue for a space where they can come together and then assert their identities. So one of the most important things in literature is literature is a space where maybe in a social situation we do not know whether it actually happens, but literature is that kind of an idealist space where reclaiming identities actually happens so very easily, because writers make it possible, provide the voice to a character who is voiceless, who has no voice, and represents that particular character in such a manner that the character becomes highly acceptable, and you start kind of, identifying that character, and then there is a situation that actually happens. So that kind of a reclamation is happening in literature, and through that reclamation, they break the frame. They break the frame. That is what I'm trying to argue. Next, please. Now let me come to my novel. The novel that I'm going to deal with here is Animals People by Indra Sinha. This is published in 2007. When it was published, it received a lot of reception. It is an imaginative fiction post the Bhopal gas tragedy. And after the Bhopal gas tragedy, people became disabled in multiple ways. Yeah? And the writer Indra Sinha is creating a character whose spine is twisted in such a way that the person cannot walk. And the person has to always walk on all the four. That is like an animal. And he or she is an animal, walking on all the fours like an animal. Now that is Animals People, in the sense that the novel looks at the world from the animal standpoint. Now animal in single quotes, we don't want to call him an animal, but then the novelist is quite open about it and tries to say that, this person is an animal, and then this is how society is treating him, and things like that. So that's a very interesting novel because it provides, as post-humanism, which is a celebration these days. This is also very interesting because it provides us with animal perspectives. It is not just about the human perspectives, because many times he shows that he's an animal. Sometimes the character becomes extremely cruel, and sometimes behaves in a wild manner, characteristics of animals, characterizing animal behavior. So you see that this particular character becomes very interesting, very important, and the novelist surrounds a tale around this animal who is walking on all fours. And what is interesting about this novel is as this character is moving up the social, talking to people, he falls in love with a woman. Then the animal falling in love with a woman, and then the sexual desires, that complicates the whole situation even further, and tries to see that can a woman have a relationship with a person like an animal? So question like that, and there is a character called Nisha here, and she happens to be very close to him, and she's a kind of a caregiver, and then he falls in love with that lady. And then there is this whole tussle that actually happens between them. Nothing is resolved. One of the important things about this novel is it tells us the tale of this quote-unquote animal. He's called animal most of the time, so we don't have a choice to use a better word there. So deliberately the novelist wants us to use this particular word and the perspective, and then you see that no tension is actually resolved. The idea is not to resolve the tension and say that, okay, everything is fine, hunky-dory and stuff like that. It is not that, but it is actually to show the kind of a problem that people with disabilities face, and the manner in which there is no resolution to the kind of stigma and shame they carry. So that's the central idea, Indra, and this was shortlisted for some prizes and all that, so I think that is immaterial for us. Another important aspect about this novel, my dear friends, is it takes place in a fictional town, and it's not in Bhopal, okay? It takes place, though it is about Bhopal tragedy, but then like R.K. Narayan makes Malgudi, Indra Sinha creates a fictional town called Khaufpur. Now the very title, the very name is interesting because there is khauf in that, Khauf in the sense, I believe in Urdu, is something which is scary or which is something fearful, which is bhayanaka, something of that sort in the Indian languages. So it is in a kaufpur, an animal lives, and the tail of the animal. It is a very interesting tale, and not much of a critical discussion I see around this particular, though it has received some awards and all that stuff. Not much of a critical discussion is actually happening on this interesting novel. So, okay, next please. Yeah, what is interesting about this is you see that the post-colonial critique of power and capitalism, of course, these are some of the important themes that you actually see. The animal is silenced, yeah, and what are the forces that actually silence? Colonial powers, of course, have played a very important role. Capitalism, all the time we are told about a company, and company with a K, K-A-M-P-A-N-I, company, you know. So it is company which is actually doing all these things. You know, just as what happened in the Bhopal tragedy, there was a company that kind of gave rise to that gas leak, and because of which people became disabled. So here is this particular situation, that is company doing all that. So disability and subaltern embodiment, you know, you see that disability is shown, and subalternity is a kind of an embodiment, and the character, you know, animal actually carries this, you know, in a strong manner, and it is not difficult for us to understand this character as subaltern character, because it does provide us with a lot of opportunities to show the manner in which he is being rendered voiceless. Then we have other kinds of ideas with regard to narrative style. Yeah, even in the way in which the novel is narrated, not just in the content but also in form, it breaks the frame. Now, what do I mean by that? The novel is a collection of different languages. It is also, some part is in French, some part is in English, some part is in Indianized, English and Hindi and things like that. It's a collection of various kinds of languages. It doesn't stick to the norm of presenting the idea in one particular language. It brings in several kinds of languages, and at one point of time you'll see that it might be pidgins and varieties and Creole kind of stuff which has been Indianized to a great extent. And also you see that the perspective is from that of not a human being but an animal kind of a perspective, which is again interesting and very important and makes us think a lot, and how this is actually breaking this whole idea that it is only human beings who can narrate. Can animals also narrate? Questions like that. And of course it brings in ethics of representation. That is the central question in subalternity. Can we represent them at all? Is it, I think Gayatri Spivak is asking that age-old question, can the subaltern speak? And if at all he or she speaks, then can we hear that? And is it possible to hear? And who is going to mediate? And questions like that. Do we need a mediator at all? So here is Indra Sinha trying to mediate. He is Indra Sinha trying to create a character who is voiceless, who is animal in a way, and then providing us with kind of an opportunity. And he's a disabled character with a twisted spine to such an extent that it cannot be corrected. And one of the important things about this novel, why I like personally about this novel, is there is an instance, my dear friends, where there is an opportunity given to the character that we will do a surgery on you and will correct you. And this animal, quote unquote animal, refuses. Says, I am happy living this shameful existence. So he's using shame as a weapon, shame as a device. Shame is not you, not that I am shamed. It is the society, it is an inability of you people that you have made me like this. So that's the reason why I refuse. So that kind of a situation is very interesting about this novel, and likes to lead existence which is completely animal oriented, and likes to be an animal, perfectly fine with the character. Okay, go ahead. Next please, next. Yeah, so you see that there are several other ideas which are interesting about this novel, and you see that the embodied trauma, and you see there is an embedded trauma and structural violence that is actually committed. There are various instances in the text that actually brings in this particular embodied trauma. There is a voice that is traumatic. Yeah, even though you see that animal is cracking fun in the novel, you also see that animal is deeply, deeply unhappy about the social situation. There's a subtle layer of subversion in humor. The humor is used with an intention to mock at the society, not mock at oneself. Yeah, so humor is used with a double device. So things like that. So that is another important idea. Embedded trauma is something that we see. And then we have other ideas which are interesting. Load of them, I cannot talk about so many of them that are there here. The profane embodiment and the narrative structure that has actually been seen as a kind of a collection of various voices that becomes extremely important and significant. And the self-acceptance, as I said, self-acceptance and critiquing the binary being the human-animal binary, and trying to say that we should not look at life in a post-humanist manner, not as a binary, but rather as a kind of a situation where animal and humans are should be seen more or less in kind of equal terms, if possible. So that is what we have here. Go ahead, next please. Yeah, next. Yeah, so various ways in which we have ideas associated with this particular text. We have interesting concerns here with regard to new colonial capitalism, power, of course, post-colonial critique and systemic justice. There are ideas that I'm trying to use all these points simply to make a case that we should not have any doubts with regard to the idea that this is actually a subaltern situation. It is actually a subaltern novel. So I have also read certain kinds of writings where is a disabled person really a subaltern, because a person with disability can come from a upper caste or upper social status, or economically a higher ladder, so things like that. But there are questions that are associated. But I'm trying to use arguments, trying to make a case, strong case, that the novel that we are actually trying to deal with falls very much into this notion of disability. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah. Let me come to the next novel that I'm going to talk about. This is Trying to Grow by Firdaus Kanga. This is another important novel that has a character called Darius Kotwal. Yeah? Darius Kotwal is a Parsi boy. Now, this particular Parsi boy is affected by a very kind of a strange disease, and that disease is of brittle bones. Yeah? The bones go brittle, and there is no cure. And what actually happens as the person grows is that the brittle bones start shrinking, and when they start shrinking in such a manner, the physical growth of the character is affected. The character cannot grow tall, cannot grow in terms of mass, cannot grow in any of those terms. So that is one thing. The other metaphoric way of growing is the way in which one grows and gets matured. That is also affected. So the Firdaus Kanga is actually playing on these two growths and trying to say that the maturity, of that particular character, I'm trying to grow. That is what Kotwal is trying to say, but my growth is hampered. My growth is hampered by social structures. My growth is hampered in terms of issues concerning my existence, and it is not possible for me to go ahead. And Firdaus Kanga is also a screenplay writer, and he has actually turned this into a movie called Sixth Happiness. So I have actually mentioned that in 1997, this particular thing was turned into a movie called Sixth Happiness, and trying to see how people with disabilities are talking about, are existing, are leading lives which are, very, very akin, very, very, very similar to subaltern existences. And there are ways in which, now the problem, they are not accusing biology. They're not trying to say that, okay, nature has made me like this, or God has given this curse. No, they're not trying to say that. They're actually trying to investigate the society. Disability and impairment. What Firdaus Kanga is trying to do here is that there is something called impairment and there is something called disability. Now, what is impairment? Impairment is some bodily deformity, some kind of a biological problem, some gene problem, something which we don't have any control over. But what is disability? Once somebody has an impairment, if the society says, hey, because of this impairment, you cannot do this. Hey, you are not fit here. You have to get out here. You are ostracized. You cannot be participating in this venture. You cannot be doing this. You cannot be doing that. When such questions are being asked, when such questions are being asked, and when such kind of inaccessible barriers are constructed by the society, it is at that time that disability gets created. Disability is not inherent. Impairment may be inherent, but disability is social imposition. Society imposes disability upon a person who has impairment. So this is what we need to understand. And Firdaus Kanga tries to see that I'm trying to grow, but society would not allow me to grow. Yeah, I hope I'm making sense. Yeah. So let me just go next, please. Yeah. So trying to grow, there are core themes that is a very, very common: disability and desire. Again here, the person is trying to grow, Kotwal is trying to grow, but then the desire of the disabled individual is something which is very important. I mean, desire in all senses of the term, including the sexual and the way in which people with disabilities are actually treated as people who do not have desires at all. So that kind of a situation, again, trying to group them into the situation. And intersectional identity, of course, I have talked about it. Disability, this is a Parsi community. Firdaus Kanga comes from Parsi, and for that ethnic reason also, this is not just about disability, it is also about a community which is a minority. So in that sense, he belongs to this Parsi community and then is affected by disability where the bones don't grow, the brittle bones, and the character doesn't grow. As a human being, he cannot grow because of social situations and things like that. There's a lot of humor. One of the most important things about disabled novels, novel in disability studies, is there's a pungent humor. There's a sarcastic humor. They keep laughing as if the shame is not towards them, but it is the society which has, to face all that shame and things like that. So the humor is something which we cannot miss here in the novel. Next, please. Yeah. So of course, disability analysis. There are ways in which we can read the novel. We have Kanga's narrative robustness asserts the full spectrum of human experience. Full idea of human experience, and we have for embodied situation multifaceted identities, in the sense that it is not just a character who sticks to one particular category, but there are various ways in which this particular character could be seen as a person with disability. As I repeatedly I'm repeatedly trying to assert that there's an intersectional space and not just one kind of a concrete identity construction space. Yeah, next please. Yeah, it is another important idea about this is, of course, this is applicable to the previous novel as well. It is not about somewhere in the village and somewhere in the peripheral sites, but it is in the heart of the city. This is urban marginalization, and urban marginalization also can give rise to subalternity. So that is one thing. Minority intersections and cultural ableism, trying to say that it's a pervasive criticism of ableism. Ableism is a philosophy that believes that we need to be able to do things in the world. If you are disabled, you are not fit to do anything in the world. It's a kind of a philosophy that the survival of the fittest, which comes from Darwin. Yeah. So origin of species and things like that. So that becomes extremely important. And this novel is a critique of that philosophy of ableism. Yeah. Next, please. I think I'm told by the chair that I'm running out of time. Subverting dominant discourses. Of course, several kinds of dominant discourses are being subverted. Here in this text, you see that the narrative authority is actually given to a character who is suffering from brittle bones, and there are also intersectional critique. And the character rejects pity. Any kind of a pity that is actually administered towards this particular character is not acceptable to the character. And you see that the character tries to come out with strong reasoning for that kind of a rejection. So next, please. Yeah, breaking frames, I'm just trying to conclude here. This is a space where you have intersectional narratives. Some of the novels the two novels that I'm dealing with, they are from urban situation, more or less urban condition, Bhopal tragedy, and this is again from, they are disabled situations and then bring out different kinds of identities here. So they challenge and deconstruct the existing lens through which we understand literature and narratives. And at the same time, you see that they also provide us with an ample opportunity to invent new theoretical pathways in the sense of trying to see how we can look into disability and subalternity from an interesting intellectual standpoint. And of course, it provides us with approaches to cultural critique and things like that. So those are important points that I wanted to highlight, but through an analysis of these two novels. Yeah. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. And yeah, thank you. And thank you for your cooperation and patient listening. I hope I was able to make you understand whatever I wanted to say. So thank you.
Please make note of your questions that you want to ask. We'll do it after the other two speakers have spoken to. I now invite Dr. Raju Nayak, another friend and colleague, to make his presentation.
I just want to log in. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to show some oral clippings before I start my presentation, so that's why I asked him to play it. So yeah, can you go to the next one? Yeah. Okay, these are some of the clips I got in my field work. I'll be talking about rethinking voice, visibility and power of invisible voices. So the first clip that you have seen is a professional storyteller who belong to a Lambada tribe. Their profession is to keep moving from one place to other place and narrate the stories. So I'll be dealing with the oral and then some of the women stories in my paper. It may be safely stated that throughout the history of literature, any language, hegemonic literary culture, discourse had privilege to written and urban history. Cultural tradition over the oral rural and traditions of the masses, particularly the tribes through the method of selection and exclusion, which carefully excludes marginalized tribal oral literature and makes their voices most invisible. When you think of the storytellers like the Bhatts, the picture that you have seen, they have a lot of stories to tell us. They narrate long histories of these people, and they also have short stories
nuggets, short poems, but their stories have become a kind of invisible, particularly the disciplines like literary disciplines, where um, people have started translating their stories, but those stories have not been taken in consideration or not even allowed to do the research. I wanted to share my experience when I went for the PhD with an abstract on oral stories. In the interview, panel people started asking me, what do you want to work with? Then I said, I want to work on oral stories of the Lambada tribes. And the panelists were asking me, what is your primary text? Then I said, these stories are existing and they can be translated, they can be brought to the academics. But in literary disciplines, we need to have some primary text. Then I said, unless and until you write and translate them, how and where should we get the primary text? So my experience, my story, my narration becomes a primary text for me. So if you don't translate and if you don't bring them to the academics, they become invisible and there is no primary text exists in those communities. So therefore I said their stories are becoming invisible every day. It may be safe to state that histories and contemporary news media continue to manipulate and hegemonic troops. The same phenomena can be witnessed in literary disciplines as well. Therefore, I would say that it is a high time to democratize the literary disciplines and bring the other side of the narratives and stories, at least allow them to work and translate them into various other languages. So oral literature stands as a force of resistance against the hegemonic dominant narratives, fighting the marginalized literature to be heard, visible and to understand. To understand oral literature, it is pertinent to first understand how it is different from the written form. The relevance of oral literature emerges from the study of orality in contrast with the literacy. The distinction between oral and written form and the dominance of the written over the oral form defines both the relevance and the struggle of the oral literature. The written form has always attached with the privilege, and accessibility to the written form has been alienated from the margins for a long time. I think if you go into the histories of the literature and literary, then there are many communities actually were not even allowed to access the education. Right? There are challenges for those communities to have access to the reading and writing. Therefore, I would say that when we have these challenges, how could one community produce a primary text? Right? So, to understand the oral literature, it is pertinent to understand how it is how difficult it is to produce a written text. In this context, representation or opportunity to the voice themselves through the print and media, to the print media, had been a myth once upon a time, and it continues to be a challenge even in the present era. Inclusion of oral narratives within the scheme of literature has also been one of the subordination. As I said, how people simply say that since there is no primary text, how could you work on them? You need to have primary a novel, a literary text to perceive your research. So subordination itself is a kind of challenge that comes from the hegemonic communities. And self-sufficient sources, even though they have the self-sufficient sources, and these sources are not considered, and they are always marginalized and subjugated and always seen as a subordinated voice. So in this, it is considered marginal, invisible and untouchable. therefore not worth reading. There has been a need of legitimization of the troops of literature, which has made it difficult to pursue oral literature or conduct research studies. This domination also makes a domination of popular languages over the vernacular, which subordinates expression and self identification through the vernaculars. In this context, oral literature can play a vital role in empowering the voices and bring the power to those voices that have been suppressed for a long time throughout the tribal history, for that matter, the women and the Dalit, other marginal communities. It also helps us to construct the new literature, or bring the newness to those literature, and deconstruct the histories that is already perceived through the hegemonic disciplines like literary disciplines. So to overcome that, we need to bring the inclusiveness and democratize the disciplines. Therefore, we need to have a evolutionary form. Another instance would be a story of instrument. I think you might have heard about the Kinnara player, the person Moguleya, who got recently Padma Shri award. This Kinnara captures the evolutionary nature of tradition, the oral tradition, as the steps were added one by one over time to 12 steps. 12 steps of Kinnara means 12 generations of the histories and 12 generations of stories that he is trying to bring through that small instrument. Stories and narratives elements are added to the oral traditions over time and through their history. As there is history in the instrument, there is history in every song or in every literature that they produce. And it also has interactivity and subjectivity in it. Oral traditions and the performances are always rendered and modified in the present, and also they bring the future to it. They are never stagnant like the text that we read. They always have this idea of inclusiveness and also have the idea of creating the newness in it. They are not merely ghosts of the past visiting us. They are present as well as writing the past. They are always alive and are rejuvenated with every tradition. Every time they are evoked and they bring the present in it. They are in the present and as well as the past. They carry with them a conjunctural nature, and they are also always affected by the moment of telling. They also carry an interactive quality and distinguishes them from the dominant literature. It promotes dialogue between the orator and the listener. And the dialogue always creates a space between the listener and the speaker. Unlike the written form, there is nothing concrete or rigid in oral traditions. It always welcomes the contentions, and it also holds the newness in it. The capacity of the oral rendering has many qualities in it. Like when we speak direct to the audience, the narrator uses multiple gestures, and they always connect with the listeners, and it also constructs the collectiveness, and it also constructs their new history. As Janwan Sinha in his book, he says subjectivity in oral tradition becomes a relevance here. Oral tradition offers scope for the subordinate subjectivities of both orator and the listener, and they are recorded every time they are rendered. This subjectivity is invaluable in representation of margins, which have over time objects of dominant and regiments of representation. While oral narratives have historically remained marginalized and largely invisible, the experience of the women within these communities have been rendered even more obscure. And by the what be they understood as a condition of double marginalization. To such narratives that illuminate the lived realities of the women from these communities will be discussed uh, in those stories. The story that I collected when I went for the field work, the storyteller tells me that the sort of experience that she had, though she was elected thrice as a sarpanch of the village, but her experiences and being a sarpanch of the woman, the village, she doesn't have any space in decision making bodies. And she says, who represents electoral success fails to translate into social authority or material security. Nomadic women are disadvantaged by a lyrical and layers of oppression, ranging from capacity to a patriarchal state, all which eludes only the oppression. Chandrama had not received any education, was unaware of the gram funds, the funds that the village has. The official took the advantage of this cheat and they cheated her, and they made her to sign on various papers, and they exploited her, and they actually put her in trouble because she cannot read and write. There are certain communities who are illiterate, who are having the opportunities to get elected, but still their voices are not considered, and they were not, despite occupying positions of several, such as MLAs, MPs from these communities, they do not have a space, or they are always excluded, and they do not have a meaningful participation in it. Another illustrated example of layered of marginalization of the life of a nomadic woman. She is the first woman who got enrolled in undergraduate course in Calcutta University in anthropology department. Her name is Chunni Kotal, and she is from a Lodha Sobar community, a tribal graduate woman in anthropology department. Despite achieving the milestone, Kotal education, a professional journey, was not marked by a persistent casteist ideology. An institutional hostility that she faces in the university, a lot of humiliation, a systemic discrimination, a university faculty uses on her. Though she is present, I think you must read this story. It is published in Dust on the Road by Mahasweta Devi. Can I have? She faced humiliation and systemic discrimination from the university faculty and administration, who refused to grant her a leave. 365 days she has to work. She used to cycle 30 kilometers in a day, and she was attending the classes in spite of all that. But the faculty marks her as an absent, and she was not allowed to write the exams. She belonged to a community historically stigmatized as a criminal tribe. Her repeated struggles within the institution that should have been a site of learning and liberation reveal how entrenched structure of caste and gender continues to shape access to knowledge and recognition. Chunni Kotal's eventual suicide at the age of 27 becomes a stark testament for the epistemic violence and operates when a society refuses to listen or to value the voices of its marginal members, thereby understanding how the very possibility of telling and preserving one's own story remains deeply important, particularly the tribal women's life and their experiences need to be recorded, and they need to be discussed in literary disciplines. To conclude, to rethink the voice is to rethink what counts as a history and knowledge. oral tradition long dismissed as marginal or unreliable, because most of the times they just preserve their history and their stories in oral, and there were questions that, how do you think that these stories are reliable? In fact, powerful sites, these stories become a kind of powerful site where memory, experience, and resistance are actively produced. The narrative discussed are trying to bring their own experiences, how hegemonic this literary and historical frameworks have systemically rendered tribal voices invisible, and privileging a written form as a form that has the ability to do the research. And in this process, most of the lived realities are ignored, and they are away from the mainstream disciplines like literary disciplines. The story of Chandrama and Chunni Kotal make visible how the invisibility deepens for the tribal women who experience layered or forms of exclusion across the caste, gender, and institutional structures. Their experience remind us that a representation, whether the political or academic, does not automatically lead to empower. Listening to the oral narratives then become the political act, one that challenges the dominant history and the literary disciplines. They try to restore the visibility to voice that have long been ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, Raju. I think the questions we will take after the speakers finish. Now I invite our colleague to come over. Dr. Srigita, your microphone.
Thank you, Professor Versher. A very good morning to one and all. I'm actually brimming with joy, being here in the department for various reasons. I am actually associated with department in various ways. I have my friends working at the department, Dr. Geeta, obviously. I think much before that, Dr. Khairunisa, and my own student who is a PhD scholar here, Mr. Hari Krishnan. And I'm also happy being able to share the dais with Professor Amit Kumar, Professor Ved Sharan, and also Dr. Raju Naik. Now, I in fact share most of the concerns that has been addressed by the previous scholars. But my paper is slightly different in terms of method as well as argument, because this is the story of a community, the community which I come from. The adventurous stories of the community, how they have acquired mobility through their adventurous journeys, and also their struggle to gain self-respect and so on and so forth. I do address the question of caste, gender, and ethnic conflict in the context of colonial Kerala, of course, the gender is addressed, but then women's perspective in terms of, I don't really bring in the stories of women in my community here. That could be one of the drawback of this paper. Tias, a marginalized community in Kerala, has a rich history of migration within South and Southeast Asia, particularly to Sri Lanka during 1900 to 1950. Many Tias migrated to Sri Lanka by strenuous sea crossings or illegal ferries, earning them labels such as Kochian and Kallathoni. The paper unravels their voluntary migration to Ceylon and the anti-Malayali agitation during the first half of 20th century. In the early 20th century, Tias could travel across the world since, unlike the upper castes, caste-prescribed travel restrictions were not applicable to them. The immigrants from Malabar, Cochin, and Tiruvitankur were officially referred to as Malayalis, but ethnographic research and the archival records suggest that The majority among them were in fact Tiyas. What makes them distinct from other migrant laborers from India is that they were not employed in the estates and they were closely associated with the Ceylonese in Colombo as domestic workers, coolies, small-scale business, workers and agriculture. Associated with agriculture. The vast body of scholarship on Inter-Asia migration and Indian or South Indian labor has predominantly centered on Tamil laborers in the plantation estates of Ceylon and Malaya. While K.S. Sandhu and Anagha A. Kampal briefly mention Malayali migrants in Malaya, noting their success in maintaining the plantation sector as close preserved, Shiny Daniel and Shashanka Pereira provides a more direct and relevant analysis of anti-Malayali agitation in Ceylon without any reference to caste question. Daniel and Pereira interpret the anti-Malayali sentiments in Ceylon as a product of economic competition during the Great Depression, that was during 1930s. While these economic interpretations are valid, this paper offers a more nuanced understanding and argues that the conflict was not triggered by broad competition but by a specific clash over menial jobs. This paper contends that competition for the same skilled and unskilled labor existed from the very beginning due to similar labor choices. However, these menial jobs, initially a source of derogatory identity for Malayalis as Kochian, only became a catalyst for ethnic conflict when the economic downturn compelled Ceylonese to compete for them. Furthermore, addressing the caste question, this analysis highlights an often neglected factor, the social tensions arising from the relationship between Malayali men and Ceylonese women, which further intensified the conflict. For the current paper, ethnographic research was conducted among the Tiya migrants, repatriates in the coastal belt of Thrissur district, Kerala, India, spanning from Chavakkad to Kodungalur, which covers several taluks including Pavaratti, Chetuva, Edamuttam and Talikulam. I'm sorry for non-Malayalis, these are, there are certain terms that you may not be familiar with. This region was once part of the erstwhile Cochin Kingdom or Samudri Kingdom and British Malabar during the colonial period. I have actually included some of the map, during the British period, just to have an understanding of the geographical proximity that, India and Ceylon or the colonial Sri Lanka, shared. The Ceylon A diverse group of respondents was interviewed, including first-generation migrant repatriates from Sri Lanka, the Ceylonese women who came along with them, and the second and third generation descendants of the migrants. In addition to ethnographic research, the paper draws on various archival materials such as Labour Commission reports, census reports, pamphlets, and representations by the immigrants. Ceylon Malayalis Smarandika, Historical Events of Malayalis in Sri Lanka, a souvenir published in 1986 by the Sri Lankan Malayali Welfare Association, has also been a rich and reliable source material. I have actually made two sections of the paper. The first one is titled Kallathoni or Illegal Ferries, Voluntary Migration and Caste. Under various colonial regimes, lower caste individuals from Kerala were forcibly migrated to countries across Southeast Asia. This was especially prominent during the late 19th and early 20th centuries when British colonialism established tea, coffee and rubber plantation in places like Ceylon. These lower caste laborers, known as Malabar coolies, were relocated to work on the plantations and were often subjected to exploitation and poor working conditions. An account by J. Thawaitz on the medical treatment of Malabar coolies underscores a historical reality. Even amid forced migration, they continued to follow some caste practices. However, facing severe hunger, they pragmatically transgressed rigid dietary norms, a predicament highlighted by the consumption of forbidden food and secret pork feasts. This shows that as forced migrants and coolies, they only dared to break caste rules only when it was a matter of survival. The voluntary migration of Tiyas was quite different from this, and it was triggered as well as facilitated by the caste question in several ways. As mentioned, members of the Tiya community voluntarily migrated from Cochin to Ceylon, specifically to Colombo in the early 20th century. Although there were divergent narratives, with one respondent describing how his ancestor was recruited by a British man to serve in the army in Ceylon, and another recounting his father's escape from the British Army during forced recruitment for plantation labor. Most account were of the voluntary illegal migration of the Tiyas. You may also see some of the images that I have put in there. You can move to next slides. Yeah, so some of them were actually part of bureaucracy, and they were part of the colonial administration. You can move. Yeah, please stop there. The compelling narratives of their ancestors' migration reveal that they undertook dangerous journeys at age as young as 13 to 17, either by strenuous sea crossing or using illegal dhow or ferries, consequently acquiring labels such as Kallathoni, denoting an illegal dhow or ferry, and Kochian, referring to their Cochin origin. These terms encapsulate their migration experiences. Most of these narratives share a common theme of hardship in a new land, followed by success and social mobility. Colonial modernity made Ceylon a dreamland for these migrants, who were far behind in terms of progress under the caste Hindu government in the region that was controlled by the British colonial government. The voluntary nature of this migration was, in fact, a direct response to the severe caste-based discrimination they faced in Cochin. It is apparent from the way Tiyas navigate and negotiate caste with the native and colonial government in the home country. A 1933 representation submitted by 7,211 Tiyamen residing in Ceylon to the Viceroy of India documented this struggle, asserting that their enhanced mobility and improved condition in the new land were in stark contrast to the hardship they experienced in their homeland. This document detailed how the community, despite being a significant agricultural industrial force, was systematically denied access to public spaces, government positions, and even public roads. The representation also criticized the discrimination the migrants face when they are back in their home country. On the one hand, it proves that economic mobility did not save them from caste discrimination. And on the other hand, it establishes the fact that they migrated to Ceylon to escape from such rigid, oppressive caste system. Similar colonial conditions and geographical proximity might have facilitated their movement across the sea. The First and the Second World War, the Great Flood, the famines must have accentuated such mobility. It must also be noted that the repatriates were nostalgic about the egalitarian land they referred to as Colombo, the Malayalam term for Colombo. The next section I have titled as Unraveling the Stereotype of Kochian, Menial Labor and Cross-Cultural Alliances. The stereotype of the Kochian is rooted in the perception of menial labor, even though Malayali migrants engaged in a wide range of occupations. As already mentioned, unlike Tamil migrants, who were predominantly plantation laborers, Malayalis were employed across a variety of sectors. Historical records notes that they were in high demand for jobs such as peons, porters, toddy tappers, and domestic servants, with a 1930s Labour Commission report even highlighting the unrivaled efficiency in these roles. This distinction is further clarified by Green, who notes that the term Malayali, listed as a caste on Ceylon estate, should not be confused with Malayali, with the spelling Malayali, as the latter were generally not found on these plantations. It was this particular association with menial, unskilled work that became the basis for their stereotype, regardless of their diverse occupational profile. In his analysis of whether Indian immigration caused unemployment among Ceylonese, Jackson makes several observations crucial to understanding the ethnic conflict between Malayalis and Ceylonese. See, most of these names are, I'm actually referring to the Labour Commission reports. He sides with Ceylonese witness who argued that Malayali was a more serious competitor than Tamil, as the Malayalis were more successful in securing jobs that Ceylonese preferred. This competition was evident in both unskilled and skilled labor. For instance, Jackson notes that among the crews of barges, Malayalis constituted the majority of Indian workers. While transport of export cargo from Crete to the ships was a task performed by both Sinhalese and Malayalis, an increasing interest from Sinhalese in recent years has led to a decrease in the number of Malayalis employed. Furthermore, Jackson's data from the railway sector shows that 10,500 total workers, approximately 1,450 were Malayalis, in contrast to 7,400 Ceylonese and 1,600 other Indians. A similar pattern is found at the government factory where out of 700 men employed in 1936, 60 men were Malayalis and the rest Ceylonese. These figures demonstrate the substantial presence of Malayalis in sectors where they were in direct competition with Ceylonese for specific occupation. The ethnic conflict was not simply a consequence of immigration, but rather is a result of an attitudinal shift among the Sinhalese. While Sinhalese historically viewed menial work as undignified or inferior to their race, the economic pressures of Great Depression compelled them to abandon this prejudice and compete for the same unskilled jobs they had previously shunned. This change created a direct clash with Malayalis who had gained his position in the economy precisely because their willingness to start at the bottom. As Jackson notes, Malayalis gained this position by entering it at the bottom, and their ascent from unskilled to the skilled labor set them apart. Hulagale also offered a nuanced perspective on the Malayali community, prescribing them as industrious and intelligent, and noting that their preference for the same kind of skilled labor as the Sinhalese made them formidable competitors, especially the Sinhalese prejudice against menial occupation began to break down. Hence, one can argue that the socio-economic shift and the resulting competition over labor preferences served as a catalyst for anti-Malayali agitation. The term Kochian served as a contested trope that was subjected to debate. While it was interpreted as a simple reference to the geographical origin, it was also employed as a pejorative term to emphasize the Malayalis' association with menial occupations. Reports from 1930 documented that the rise of unemployment among the Sinhalese during the Depression, Malayalis described as cheap and excellent workmen, became the subject of widespread verbal and physical attacks. The 1931 and 33 reports on Indian laborers further reveal a clear contradiction. The very qualities that made Malayalis invaluable as porters, gardeners, and domestic servants were the same qualities that rendered them unpopular and made them the target of agitation. Ceylonese preferred Malayalis as domestic laborers. As mentioned earlier, the majority Malayalis were engaged in menial labor such as domestic workers and coolies in Colombo town. Indian agent KPS Menon notes that Malayalis were called Kochians and they were the first class domestic workers. According to Daniel, these domestic laborers were known as Appu or Raman because these names were common among the Malayalis. Jackson reports, I quote, "The occupation of domestic service was one in which witness declared that large numbers of Ceylonese had been unfairly deprived of employment by the engagement of Indians. Witness spoke of the problem as confined almost wholly to Colombo and made little point of the employment of Indian Tamils as domestic servants on estate. Elsewhere in the island, the non-Ceylonese domestic servant hardly found," unquote. The formation of the Malayali Mahajanasabha, an organization of Malayalis, was a direct outcome of the social tension between Malayalis and Ceylonese, as mentioned in various Labour Commission reports. The Sabha was formed to articulate the rights of Malayalis and to combat derogatory but official labours, particularly the term Kochian, which it viewed as degrading. As a result of their efforts, a circular was issued by the Colonial Secretary in 1931 prohibiting the practice of calling or writing Malayalis as Kochian. The 1931 report notes that two terms with a certain stigma attached to them has been officially banned. Coolie for a laborer, and Cochin for a Malayali. In addition to this official recognition, the colonial government also banned gramophone records and denigrated the Malayali way of living and aimed to generate hatred towards them. The alliance between Malayali men and Sinhalese women constituted another significant source of ethnic conflict. As Indian agent KPS Menon noted, since Malayali men did not bring the women with them, they established relationship with Sinhalese women. As mentioned, severe gender imbalance among the migrants can be cited as a reason for the same. Jackson's report, citing the 1921 census, highlights that the disproportion between men and women was particularly noticeable among the Malayali community, with only 628 female for 16,409 males out of the total population of 17,127. This demographic trend persisted as the 1931 report further notes that the Malayali community was almost entirely composed of adult males, unlike their Tamil counterparts. The matrilineal system among the Malayalis is said to be another reason that justifies the absence of women along with them, as well as the facilitates their alliance with the Ceylonese women. As the Labour Commission report suggests, societal pressures of the matrilineal system, particular to the Malabar coast, was one of the driving forces behind their migration. A 1931 report provides crucial evidence of this demographic reality, noting, I quote, "The Tamil laborer migrates with his wife and children. The Malayali labour community in Ceylon is almost entirely composed of adult males. Even in Malabar, it is but rarely that the orthodox Malayali wife goes to the house of her husband. It is for the husband to go to her. It is therefore not strange that the Malayali labourers in Ceylon are rarely accompanied by their womenfolk." Unquote. Furthermore, the practice of respecting women following the matrilineal convention is cited as another reason. Consequently, the relationship formed by Malayali men contributed to the resentment of Sinhala men towards Malayali men. As the account above suggests, Malayali migrants rarely brought their families to Ceylon, with the matrilineal system being a primary reason. In his study on Tamil migrant labourers, Jayaraman observed that the unit of endogamy or marrying within one's own caste for Tamils remained intact as they typically migrated with their families. This, he argues, allowed them to uphold traditional caste structures in their new environment. Jayaraman identifies several factors that helped maintain caste among them: the short travel time from South India, the Kangani recruitment system, which enforced caste boundaries by recruiting from specific village, the fear of social punishment from village caste councils, and the use of separate living quarters known as line rooms or plantations. In contrast, the dynamics of Malayali migration diverged significantly from those of Tamil rebels, rendering these factors for caste preservation inapplicable. As their migration was primarily voluntary and illegal, Malayalis were not subjected to the Kangani system or the disciplinary pressures faced by the plantation workers. The absence of these external caste regulations is clearly demonstrated by the numerous cross-cultural alliance between Malayali men and Sinhalese women, a phenomenon further facilitated by their matrilineal convention. You may also see some of the pictures of the cross-cultural alliances. These two were married. She was a Ceylonese woman and is a Tiya man who died recently. I had an opportunity to interview both of them. These are those two. All of them are Ceylonese women who got married to Malayali men. These are some of the wedding photos. The cultural impact of these cross-cultural alliances is substantiated by articles in the Ceylon Malayali Smaradika, which shed light on both assimilation and professional integration. Kurupu observed the significant integration of Malayalis into Sinhalese society, noting that they were initially received with great respect. He writes that those who migrated married Sinhalese women and assimilated into Sinhalese society, but advises them to settle with their own families to avoid blame, hinting at the social tension these marriages caused. This trend is corroborated by Chattukutti, who highlights similar cross-cultural marriages among Malayali BD workers. Furthermore, Madhavan points out that many Malayali policemen chose to marry native Tamils, Indian Tamils and Sinhalese women, and that their children were consequently able to secure position with the Ceylon police. However, the anti-Malayali sentiment fueled by these alliances starkly captured in the propaganda of A. Gunasinghe, the leader of anti-Malayali agitation. His play Veeraya tells the story of a Sinhalese woman who forms a relationship with a Malayali shop owner only to be abandoned when he repatriates. In another play titled Shankaran is named after his protagonist Shankaran, a penniless Malayali named Shankaran who marries a Sinhalese woman. But when he goes bankrupt, he is abandoned by his wife and children and subsequently deported. Gunasinghe also wrote poems that degraded Malayali customs, traditions, and morality. As the ethnographic account suggests, historically, Thiamen's connection with women from Ceylon who were socially accepted within their community, as were relationship with women and their families across both Kerala and Ceylon. I was also surprised by the way, the casual way in which they have responded to this question. They in fact found these alliances quite normal. This openness is evident as they often discuss this connection with ease. It was common for these men to have marital arrangements in both locations, as they typically visited Kerala every 3 or 4 years. However, these cross-cultural relationships contributed to significant tensions in Ceylon. Ceylonese men perceived that they were losing their economic base and women, while also viewing their resources and women as being exploited by a community that may or may not settle in Kerala. This perception of cultural exploitation, coupled with the assimilation of Tiyas into Sinhalese culture and the abandonment of Sinhalese women by some Malayali men, contributed significantly to the growing conflict. To conclude, the Tiya's voluntary migration, a strategic escape from poverty, the caste system, and matrilineal norms, was characterized by adventurous and illegal sea crossings. The ethnic conflict during Ceylon's economic depression was consequently both economic and social. The hostility was not simple over competition for menial jobs, but was also fueled by resentment over the Tiya men's alliance with Sinhalese women. The deconstruction of the pejorative term Kochiyan further illustrates this complex dynamic, as the term evolved from a label of a derision to a marker of their distinct identity. By reading archival records, ethnographic data together, this paper has attempted to provide a more nuanced understanding of the ethnic conflict between Malayali migrants and Ceylonese. Thank you.
Thank you, Srivita. I want to thank my other colleagues, Raju Naik and Professor Amit Kumar, for their very interesting presentations. I just want to look at these terms in perspective before I invite you all to these questions. I think if you look at the word subaltern, it's basically a military term that looks at officers below the level of a captain, as a second lieutenant kind of a person. And I think that is where we can see the roots of the term there that have evolved. And the term frame that has been used here is also very interesting. Originally, the word frame had the ideas of being profitable, of being helpful, to be available, and benefit, and it had the idea of benefiting something or someone. It also had connotations of being active rigorous and bold, and then we have these connotations of a structure that holds parts together. And that's a very interesting idea that we have when we look at reframing here in this concept, and I'm sure you can interpret some of these ideas that we have had here in that context. So we now also have a frame of reference, and then we have a frame of a building, then we have frame of mind, which are all very delightful and interesting ways to look at these things. I was just wondering, as I sat here and listened to our colleague's presentation here, what Afghan women would have had to say about the subaltern in the recent times. Unfortunately, we don't have one of them here. But I think that would have been a very, very interesting thing to listen to. Anyway, now I open the field for questions. Any of you have questions, please mention the speaker's name and ask their question. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My question is to Professor Reframing, sir. Sir, when describing this larger, you came across the post-humanist part when you said that humans and animals are safe. Sir, this is a very bold statement that we should consider humans and animals safe. Take for example, I'm a scholar, PhD scholar, I have read post-humanism, and in the evening, during night, I'm walking in the street, accompanying my sibling and a pet, and some random guy comes, a sort of killer, he says that either give me your pet or give me your sibling. What would I do? I would obviously hand over my pet, because at that time when we see where is that post-humanist thought that animals and humans are safe. So one more aspect of this post-humanism thought is that this cyborg entity is coming into the discourses where we place that mixture of humans and technologies, their rights. Well, we are talking about the rights of the robots. We're talking about the rights of the cyborg creators. And where does this subalternity leads to? So, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are two things here. One is when post-humanism is trying to say that we need to look into things in almost similar terms, they're not talking about your individual attachment. Suppose somebody is attached to the pet or somebody is attached to the sibling, it's a matter of personal choice. At a philosophical level, it's a different thing altogether. They're trying to say that humanity, over a period of time, has prioritized only the humans. It is time that we also understand that non-humans are also, in some sense, equivalent or similar to that of humans. Non-humans, by which we mean animals, vegetation, technology, climate, environment. Yeah. So that is the different idea. They are trying to argue, trying to say that it is not a matter of choice. The matter of choice is at a personal level. That's what I understand. Suppose somebody is attached towards a particular idea and chooses one over the other. That's a matter of personal preference. I would rather think about this particular. That is not a post-humanism problem. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand. That is one thing. The second is with regard to cyborgs. Cyborgs or AI right now cannot be seen as subalterns. They are alternative humans in a way. So in no sense of the term I see that they are in any way, subaltern. I mean, I think they very much satisfy the conditions, and there might be a time when they become more important than the humans. And the humans might become subalterns when it comes to when the machines might take over. That might be, research is still going on, and then probably when the AI starts doing something called a deep thinking and deep reasoning, which I think it is already doing to a certain extent. So when it is capable of doing I think about 50 years from now, not so, we need not worry about it as of now. But then I think the paradigms of who constitute the subaltern has been changing. Initially, it was thought to be a category in the post-colonial societies. Then even the Europeans started talking about it. Then the developed world also had a concept of subaltern. Subaltern has been extended to various concerns. So I don't know if I answered your question, but these are some thoughts that I present.
Hello. I cannot be happier with this panel because it's always a pleasure to be able to hear this talk with so many of non-faces, all of you in fact. If someone has a more important, well thought out question, I'm happy to relinquish the chance. But my question is to Dr. Naik. And I ask this as a fellow researcher who is very much invested in documenting oral tales and archiving it. So my one of the questions is that now, since your PhD, do you think that now are you able to see things that you could probably call primary text, or have there been documenting that has been happening? And another question for you with that is, I'm curious to know that in archiving, is the state playing any role? So are there any incentives that you find? Or do you find that it is the opposite? Because in my case, it is the opposite that I'm finding. So those two. And if I could add, and if we have time, another thing that I'm very curious to know, and in my conversations with other researchers who are also trying to document oral tales from their cultures, is that often we find that people are hesitant to share stories to people from their own culture. They're much more happier to share with outsiders. That's what my what we call experience has been. It's not that they won't share, but the willingness that we find to share with outsiders. So I am particularly speaking from the context of Lakshadweep, not the entire of Lakshadweep, but one island called Minicoy, which maybe is refers to as Manipur. So it's a very interesting island in the sense that it was added to Indian subcontinent only as late as 1956 or so. So earlier it has been part of Maldives. So linguistically, culturally, they share everything with Maldives rather than the rest of the island. So what I have noticed in my research is that in probably 1961 census, the population of this particular island was around only 4,000. In the latest 2011 census, it is 10,000 something population. I'm not talking about the entire Lakshadweep, I'm referring to just one island because it is different from the rest. But in terms of state policies, one finds lots of discouragement in the documenting. In 1961, a separate radio program was launched for the people, just nearly 4,000 people. Now the population has increased. We find that the press has been shut down, radio has been shut down, and in the schools now the language is also taken away. Recently, in the last summer, when I was there was a protest because the native language is being taken out. So what I have found in my field is that there is not much of help from the government, so I would want to know in your context what is the case. Thank you. Sorry for the very long question.
Thank you for asking those wonderful questions. Actually, the first one, the primary text, the question that you asked. So, still there are much more need to be produced. I just focused on one community, and I recently published that book. Hopefully, many people will treat that, won't treat that as a primary text, but they may take some cues from there. Maybe when they are going through it, they may find some interesting to carry further that research. When it comes to the archives, you look at I think many of you might have visited museum here in Hyderabad. There is a museum, tribal museum. You see only the bodies, structures, and all that. How they were grinding, and there is a grinder there and all that. How they hold the tools to cut the trees, that kind of thing. But if you look at the knowledge system that they have, they just describe this tribe is this tribe is this. But how the epistemology exists in their community is outstanding. So we need the knowledge, how they produce, how they look at what actually is their worldview, and from where we can bring that the tribal worldviews through only the songs, the stories, and all. So that is not done by the state, and there is no serious contribution towards preserve the knowledge system of the tribals. And it is everywhere the same across the country. Interestingly, when the country's population increases, the tribal population decreases. You find, at the fine morning, one person is alive, and that language is in danger. What happened to those communities? Why are the number is decreasing every day? I mean, there are attempts from certain states to actually look at their language and give the script to those languages, but using the other languages, writing their language in, using alphabets of other languages, but that is not succeeding. Particularly in Telangana, we started tribal departments, and that is not very successful. So actually any 10,000 speaking community needs to be recognized. Their language needs to be recognized. Thousands of tribal people speak their language, but that is not being given any space in the linguistic survey. So that's the plight of the tribal communities.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rashid. My question is to Professor who talked about the disability. So, despite the academic and intellectual discourses on disability, there seems to be a gap when it comes to the practical inclusion of disabled people in mainstream spaces and institutional spaces. So, from your perspective, from your perspective, what do you think? Where do you see the practicality failing the most, and what is the present ground level condition of the disabled lives today? Thank you.
I think that the awareness concerning disability is increasing, and now there are so many disability sensitization workshops. 20 years ago, the situation concerning disability was in a very bad shape. Right now, thanks to the RPD Act, Universal Declaration of Rights of Persons with Disability, and then the Government of India has also passed that Act in RPD Act in 2015-2020. Lot of issues are now being considered. The situation is actually much better when you compare to what it was earlier. Now also the number of disabilities which were traditionally seen, there were only 3 or 4 physically visible disabilities. Now there are several invisible disabilities which are there inside. Mental disabilities, chronic ailments and leprosy related issues, anxiety, thalassemia, government is also taking measures considering this particular idea, it is much better. And that is the first part of the answer. The second part, we try to say that there's a gap. There is a gap everywhere. I mean, I think Dr. Rajanaik was trying to point out the way in which there is, the government is trying to do something, but then the realization on the practical front is very, very less. So that kind of a dissatisfaction is felt in all the subaltern spheres. I think that is something, and that makes us think about these categories in a more serious and nuanced manner. One of the reasons for that is the sense of contentment. I mean, I don't know whether I'm correct because this is my analysis. People suddenly get into a sense of contentment as soon as their rights are realized. But what needs to be understood is not just those who have gotten into the those who have gotten into some kind of a situation, but then you have to think about a larger picture and start working for it. That kind of a commitment and understanding to work for a welfare or kind of betterment of the whole disabled community is something that is missing among the disabled populations across the country. So since that is not there, I think there is a big gap, and one has to actually take this into consideration seriously. There should be awareness, there should be a motivation. This is just a mental issue, this is just an ambition, mental concern that needs to be filled. Apart from that, I do not know what other proper, yes, but then awareness is increasing now, thoroughly. Teachers who are very, very kind of disrespectful to disabled students earlier, they are no longer doing that now. Because now, not because of the law, but also because of the reason that they have to, respond to this in a serious manner. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but I was trying to open up a few perspectives.
Hi, my question is to Srimita ma'am. It's just about my curiosity, ma'am. Did the Ceylon women have caste, like how they practice caste? How their tension, like if they are also practicing the caste, then how they treated like these people. At the same time, when coming back to India, like Kerala, how these caste system from in Kerala also treated them, because I think both of them are from different castes. Like I don't know how that Tia also, like about the Tia men also may look for the upper caste from Sri Lanka. So I just want to be part of this curiosity. I just asking.
Thank you, Benny, for that question. Since the paper was not, entirely on the cross-cultural lens, I could not mention these caste dimension. See, if you have noticed the photographs, you must have seen that, some of them are actually from the upper caste background. There's a Brahmin woman who got married to a Tiya man, She recounts the story of, their marriage. When the Tiya man was, interested in her, and when he proposed, she said, get out to my father. And then when he met his father, his suggestion was to start up industry, and then once he established as a business person, you can think about marriage. So she also talks about the untouchability that they practiced. But then the difference is that once he achieved economic mobility, he could get married to her. I think when I further asked her about her identity, in fact, most of them, or majority of whom I interviewed, they are also the second or third generation migrants from India, belonging to different caste communities. So this Brahmin woman actually claims a Tamil lineage. But then, I think the difference between them is that the migrant Indians and the Indians is that, even when we achieve economic mobility, we will not get respect, or we will not be treated as equals. But in Sri Lanka, this is the difference that I find in the way they practice caste. Or I think, that is how it has facilitated these, cross-cultural alliances. At the same time, I was also told about, narratives of in the sense, most of the Tiya men were not committed to these women. They were just having an alliance with them, and they just get back to Kerala. that has actually given rise to the tension among the Malayalis and Ceylonese. For example, the nurse that you must have noticed that photograph of a Ceyloni nurse. She talks about her story. She says that this person whom she got married to was not ready to take her along with him to Kerala when they were when he was trying to leave, and her father was adamant that he should take her along with him. And then there are also narratives of these Ceylonese women coming in search of their husbands or partners in Kerala. But then what I found interesting is that despite all these differences, most of the migrants or most of the repatriates were, talking about such alliances with ease. They did not find it as problematic, or they did not find it as a moral, problem. But of course, I am yet to delve more into the caste question, and I'm actually working on a paper that focuses on this cross-cultural alliance. I hope I have answered your question.
Okay, I hope we have no questions left. If there are any, we are here. We will always disturb these scholars. So for now, I would again request Dr. Ved Sharan to share the final words so that we can carry these things to our home. Yeah.
Good afternoon once again, and I want to thank the organizers of this amazing seminar, conference, on a very, very important and relevant topic. The three papers that were presented here are of a high standard, I'm sure, and we have had a very interactive session. I would say that the presenters were very thought-provoking in the sense that they expanded the borders of the subaltern and included people and areas that are not conventionally regarded as subaltern. So Professor Amit Kumar has brought in disability studies into this area, which is a very, very complex and a very sensitive area. And I'm sure we have appreciated these ideas, and we will take them forward in our research again. Dr. Raju Nayak, of course, is a very involved, committed person with a tribal background, and we can see the intensity and the commitment that he had in his presentation here. The importance of recognizing oral traditions is a very, very prime one, I would say. We have had so many people talking about oral traditions. We have many terms that have come up which have been sort of accepted for a while, rejected for a while, modified. We have the great and little traditions of Robert Redfield that have been applied in India. I'm sure Raju would be familiar with those things. But these are not terms that are not really in vogue now. The great and little traditions Redfield proposes are not just one-way traffic, but two ways, both ways. And some people in India have, I think, used these terms to study these things. And I'm very happy that young scholars like Raju Nayak are taking a fresh look at these things. Sribita's paper, I think, was a very, very interesting one that has taken us across the straits and across time itself. And it's a very, very relevant one, I think, because of the ethnicities, the ethnocentrism and all those violent ideas that are being now in vogue around us. So I think in that way her paper is a very important and a useful contribution of a community that has been working with the Eravas for equality and the abolition of the caste system itself. But it's a very, very heartening thing to see that young people like her are looking at these ideas once again. The questions that you have raised are also very interesting here, and I want to thank you all for being such an amazing and a wonderful audience. I think I don't need to elaborate too much on their papers because they have been so very, very clear and relevant to the topic, except that I just wanted you to look at the main theme of this conference once again and see how the ideas that are proposed in the conference are relevant for us, and I'm sure lots of PhD scholars here would have benefited from these interactions and discourses. So thank you very much for inviting me and the colleagues here. Have a fantastic time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now it's time to felicitate our guests. So I would first request our Dean, Professor Gulfishan Habib, to present a memento and a certificate and a kit from the organizing committee. Present to our chair first, Professor Ved Sharan. Do we have the certificates too? Do we have a certificate too? Oh, that is kept in there. Okay. Now I would request our head, Dr. Nagendra Kottachedu, to present the memento to Dr. Amit Kumar. Now I would request Dr. Khairun Nisa to present memento to Dr. Raju Nayak. Now I would request Dr. Shagufta Shaheen to present memento to Dr. Sirbita PV. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
Yeah, I want to thank my student, Dr. Nagendra, for inviting us here, and Ashraf for being such a wonderful, wonderful host for us.
I'm doing it second time, sir.
Okay, that's fine, but you did a fantastic job. That's need to acknowledge.
Thank you very much. Now, we have sat here in presence of very big ideas. My mind, like everyone else's, feels like a garden after heavy rain. So, I am deeply grateful to our speakers for sharing their light to all of you, to all of you for being such a steady and generous, and thanks to all of you for being such a generous audience. Please enjoy the lunch now. That is also necessary. But I request we all assemble here once more at 2:30 sharp to begin our afternoon paper presentations and a scholarly event. And I myself will be presenting a paper, so it's necessary for you to come. Thank you very much.